So today we are here with Paul Carroll, the editor at Turning Roads, and it is Folklore comic anthology by Limit Breaks Comics. And it just released like a couple of weeks ago at Kickstarter, and it just like boomed, like it got suddenly like a lot of support. It has some really cool names on it, like Triona Farrell or James Kirlian or from Blackwood and other names, and it just like have a lot of massive great Irish creative talent and also other artists. And I wanna first ask you how the idea to make this anthology came to be and how do you define it? Because I feel like that would be a great thing to hear from you.
So I think it was going back to Thought Bubble in Yorkshire. It's just a big comic one. A lot of UK and Irish comic creators were just talking about like trying to put together anthologies. There's a big focus on like horror anthologies and things that might ruin our childhoods. Take some beloved figures from television and make some weird comics about them. And I guess the idea of just getting lots of different collaborators together for a book stuck in my head for a while. And then I had like another conversation with Derpla Kelly, who's an Irish colorist at an event called Decaf, which is in Dublin. And we spoke for like 40 minutes or something in the middle of the market space about comic anthologies. And this was all like pre-COVID. And then once March hit in 2020, I was out of a job and kind of just had nothing to do to fill my time and trying to figure out what I'd be doing with my life while the pandemic was shutting down the world. And then the Irish Arts Council announced a thing for literature projects, they're calling them. We didn't end up getting the funding for it for the book, but I got encouragement from other creators in the Irish comic community, like, yeah, just do it. Like, you don't need the Arts Council to back this book because they don't really recognize comics that well in Ireland yet on the funding level. So it was kind of a hit and miss chance anyway that we were going to get the money for it, but then decided to just go ahead with the Kickstarter and pray. But yeah, the way I define the book then is it's Irish comics anthology, so it's focusing on Irish myths and legends, and it's retelling them into modern and future Ireland, so through the lens of science fiction, fantasy, and magical realism. So I've got, I think, 36 comic creators. I have to update the list because someone's added their own colorist and editor to it, and 18 comics. And as of 6 days into the Kickstarter, we also have a cover by Declan Shalvey, who's worked with Marvel and Image, which is completely insane.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to ask you also, how was editing those stories like? I can imagine like feeling some of them really close to your heart when you arrive. Like, so, as you say, some of these tales are told, I imagine, to children too, are something that is like around you. So how was like editing those spins on those tales, those stories that go in the future or reimagine tales that are around you and around the people that you relate to?
Yeah, I think I had a pitching process for creators to pitch their ideas. I had to reject half the pitches that the book received, which was a really weird feeling because I'm normally on the other side of submissions. But from that point on, I got to like pick the ones that at least the idea that was being presented I was passionate about. So I was really excited about like all of these random ideas that people just came up with, different twists on different things. I think there's only one overlap between like one creature. So there's two banshee stories in the book. Other than that, it's completely different stories. But the two takes in the banshee are completely different. So one is a quiet, somber, kind of melancholy thing by Kerry Smith and Leanne Hamilton, and the other is sci-fi, which is using Banshee as a computer system. And it was exciting to see these two different takes on like the same basic idea, and kind of like every story kind of ticks that box in the same sort of way, where they're a twist that I wouldn't have thought of myself. And it was fun to just help the creators manage how they're telling the story. Then, like, some of them needed a bit more work than others, but it depends on how they're telling the story initially, and some of them would be used to much bigger projects. So it was nice to get into it and to give feedback to people that they actually appreciate it. Um, it's unusual to be in an editor seat for like 30 different people, but yeah, it's enjoyable, and yeah, it's exciting just to see the stories take shape, because normally I only have that from my own scripts, where I would see something go from scripts to inks to colors to letters, and sometimes I'd be doing two or three of those steps myself. So it's fun to see all these different stories develop from all these different creators, and I get to just watch each step as it goes. But yeah, I'm excited about the stories in this book.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and it sounds like, I don't know, kind of relating from my personal experience. I'm from the north of Spain, from Galicia, and we also have like a tradition of oral history of tales. That's like something that is common here, and I wonder how you feel, maybe that oral storytelling tradition relates in some way to what you are all doing now. That is informed completely different, because it's like a book with colors and images. But I imagine that's something similar, something like you want to tell, like to pay tribute or relate to those oral traditions.
Yeah, so I think Irish stories would have been shared the same way the Spanish ones would, where they would be oral stories just told generation by generation. And as far as I know, there's only one person in Ireland who still keeps up the tradition of Irish storytelling. He's actually doing a presentation, or he's performing or something like that at the St. Patrick's Festival. They're doing it online this year. Um, but the whole focus on the oral storytelling was for a community to be built around it. So there's always an essence of like other people being involved in the story, which it kind of meant the Arts Council saying no to our thing almost fit better, because the crowdfunding and the crowdsourcing of the stories and working with all these different people, it creates a little sense of community around the book. So there's a small community online now who are kind of intimately aware of these stories that are being told in a new way. Even though the medium is going to be different, it's kind of indicative of how storytelling has changed, especially in Ireland, because we used to be an oral storytelling nation, and then we became the prose writers and the poets, and now people are starting to see lots more comic creators show up in Ireland. Like, we've a couple of dozen professionals working in Ireland, I think, and yeah, it's exciting to just be able to witness this transformation of our storytelling from one version into another.
So I'm curious to know, what do you think the medium in itself, the comic medium, can like enrichen those stories, or pass them in a different way? And I'm curious about, what do you think of this medium, of how it's taking, as you say, there's more and more creators coming later, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think comics is an interesting medium because people can experience it at their own rate. So someone can pour over one page for an hour, while another person might click through a book in that amount of time. But I think it then, because people can revisit it over and over again, I think it kind of preserves this new form of storytelling. And with the way social media has gone, and especially now that people are kind of stuck to digital experiences and communicating with each other because of COVID-19, we have this. There's a massive online comic community who are just constantly shouting out praise for the books that they love, which is, it's one of my favorite things to see. And Declan Shalvey's been doing it a lot for his Immortal Hulk Flatline book that came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's retweeting all some of the praise that the book is getting, because it means a lot to him. And it's the same thing that's been happening with Turning Roads. You know, there's people who are responding really positively to the idea. So I was like, I need to let other people know that this people are reacting positively to this book that I'm creating. But yeah, it's I couldn't see it happening with prose because I think prose readers, they fall into different brackets, and there's already established forms for how people talk about it. They tend to do reviews, or they'll be in a group on Facebook or something like that. But there's very little shouting out about something because there's not much you can show from a prose book. And I say this as someone who writes prose as well. But you can't just take a picture of a paragraph and put it up on the internet because out of context it means nothing. But with comics, there's so many different elements to the storytelling that people can talk about each one individually. And people love to just share their favorite panels or a splash page that caught their attention. And you don't really get that with oral storytelling. People can still have excitement and hype about it, as we've seen with like the podcast movement that has happened over the past few years. But I think comics still offers a unique way for people to celebrate the stories they love, and for creators who tell stories in different ways.
Yeah, it kind of feels like when someone shares a lyric of a song they like, or a quote of a poem. Like, you can do that with a comic. You can share a panel and be like, "Wow, this rules!" Like this specifically. And I think this project. Well, I saw it and I was like, "Yeah, this is really important." I feel like it's the moment. Like it needed to happen already, and I want to ask you if there's like any inspirations for the idea of things that have happened before, or just like to know.
Uh, I'm trying to think. Like there aren't an awful lot of Irish folklore comics that exist, at least not published in the mainstream market. So it was almost the absence of them that made me want to do something. But they're also all kind of direct retellings. There'd be slight twists on them, like Will Sliney, who's down in Cork, did a Cupán book a few years ago with O'Brien Press, who's one of our national publishers. And it was an almost direct retelling of a Cupán story with some embellishments. He made him a bit more like a superhero and things like that, but it was still set in ancient Ireland. And I guess I wanted to take what I knew about Irish folklore and just mix it up a bit. Because I think when you change the old ideas into something new, but still try to preserve what made them what they are, you get something exciting out of it. Sort of a
Honestly, I
reboot.
can. Yeah, it's a reboot. I can't wait to read it. Like this really sounds amazing. And can you tell me a bit more about Limit Breaks comic, about your editorial, like the place where this happens and how it came to life and etc.
Yeah, so Limit Break Comics, we call ourselves a collective because up until this point we've never had like open submissions for a publication. So it's myself, Gary Maloney, who's another writer, and Gareth Luby, who's an artist. And it's back in 2018, or let me see if I have the dates right. 2017, we met Gary at an event called Small Press Day. Myself and Gareth had already been working together on comics. So in 2018, we launched Limit Break Comics at the next Small Press Day. And myself and Gary both brought our first collection of short stories with us. So Gary released a book called Mixtape, and I had a book called Life and Death. So they were completely different sorts of books, except they're both collections of 4-page stories. And the way Limit Break works is we promote each other, and we encourage each other, and we'll read over each other's work and things like that. But we don't have like one editorial department. We don't function like a business in that sense. This is the first time one of us has been like kind of watching over lots of different creators to try and manage one thing. But yeah, so it's mostly like a support group nearly for comics. And we're kind of half dragging some of our friends in with us. Well, one of the contributors to the book, Aaron Fever, he's used the phrase "a rising tide raises all ships." When he said that in the middle of a Zoom call, the way things are, Zoom calls are life now. And he said when you said it, I was like, yeah, that's what I want the book to be. I want the book to be able to lift up all these other creators, even if they're not directly a member of Limerick Comics. I still want to be able to celebrate all these different comic creators, and I don't even know all of them personally. Especially like there's a lot of international ones who I never would have met before, like Dominique Duong and I hope I pronounced her name correctly, but Dominique and Ember Johnson, their portfolios just blew me away, and I want more people to see their work. But I've never met the pair of them before, and until this project, I didn't know who they were, and they just happened to pitch their stories into the book, and I just fell in love with the way they told comics, and yeah, just that's kind of like the essence of what Limit Break is, trying to find people to celebrate them. Like Gary almost never shuts up about the people he works with because he loves other people to see what they're doing, which is I think it's a beautiful way of how a comic community can form, where people just celebrate each other rather than trying to compete. Because at the end of the day, it's a collaborative medium, so people are always going to need to work with someone else, even if it's not directly on one single book.
So I'm curious about it was like an open call that you get submissions, or did you pick any of the creators before?
The only two stories that were already kind of earmarked in it were my one and Gary's one, and literally because we were both in the break. Other than that, it was open call for submissions. But it was a pitch rather than a finished comic, so people just had to pitch an idea. Because I didn't know if I'd have funding to pay people, so it was pushing everything on the long finger in the hopes that we'd have the money to pay people, which we do now, yay. But yeah, it was an open submission. I did chase a few people who had said, "Oh, this looks interesting. I might pitch to this," and who I just hadn't heard from for like 6 weeks, because I think it was a 7-week window we had pages open for. So I chased a few people who I hadn't seen stuff for, but other than that, it was literally just waiting for people to send in their pitches, and then getting to sift through every single one of them and trying to have a lot of overlap in stories, and try figure out how I would respond to people if they asked for specific feedback, if I had to say no to them, because I was trying to be helpful to people even if I couldn't take them into the book. Yeah, it was a weird position to be in. I would do it again, but yeah, so it was a weird experience. I enjoyed it, but I don't know if I necessarily recommend it to everyone to open up pitches and then have to judge everyone, because it's not nice saying no.
I was surprised by how some creators were very well known, like Tiana Farrell is very well known, and some other creators were less known, but that makes sense with the pits thing. Like they just, anyone who could pits, who felt they had to share a certain story about this. So that's pretty cool.
The comic I'm working on is actually, so I trained as the colorist on my comic, so she's really well known. And then on the other side of it, James Killian is the artist on mine, and almost no one knows who he is. I just became familiar with him because of a class that Declan ran in the Irish Writers Centre a few years ago, and I saw his work just over the years. So when it came to it, I was like, "How'd you fancy drawing horses?" Because most artists hate drawing horses. I was like, this specific myth needs a horse. It's the Doulahan story, so it's the headless horseman. So you can't do that without a horse drawn. So I was like, did you want to draw a horse? There's not going to be much of the horse, but you want to draw a horse.
Hey, did you draw horses?
He lives in Westmeath, so there's horses.
It's so fun. So, talking a bit of your own work, I just read Lexus today, and it struck me as the first story. I was really like enchanted by it, because it's about social anxiety, and like this person who can teleport, and just like has like a conflict and is like teleporting all these different places because of his anxiety. And that was like, I don't know, it was very sweet to me the way you treated that anxiety with empathy and with, probably with personal experience also. But I just loved it, and I want to ask you how is the process of creating versus editing. And I just that was the story that most struck to me, that I read it and I was like, oh, this is such a great idea, like the teleported with anxiety and this like fizzing. I don't know, it really arrived to my heart as someone with anxiety.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to remember the timeline of how that came together. I think about a month before it was published, I finally went to a doctor about my own anxiety. Um, so like I was using my own experience to kind of build up how the character was reacting. Obviously, I can't teleport. Life would be quicker if I could. But yeah, that's it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. And I guess because it came from my own worries and how my own thought processes have worked for things. And when I pitched it to Rebecca Reynolds, who's the artist on it, well, I say artist, she did the art, colors, and the letters because she's a superstar. I was just like,
Wow.
I said to her, like, I want it to be a 9 panel grid, which I'd never done before, and I know artists hate doing. I said, just like, because I wanted to have I'm forgetting the word, but the contrast, I guess, between the order on the page and the disorder in Shane, the character's mind. So I wanted him to be bouncing around the page completely kind of chaotically and to be suffering for it, while the panels present a rigid structure. And she was all for it. She was like, "Yeah, I can make that work." she's she's honestly one of those creators who I think more people need to be reading. She has some of her own stuff out, and she's working on another one with me now, which I'm really excited about. Hopefully, that'll be some point this summer, if not in the fall. But it's another 8 page story. And yeah, so like for me, I always send a page. So it's like a 1 page document. And I'll give like a summary of the story and then a page breakdown and like sort of the tone I'm aiming for. So that if they want to do it, they know what I'm looking for when I'm sending the script afterwards. And if I've completely missed the mark on the tone that I'm going for in the script, they can call me out on it. But they already know the tone that I'm looking for before they do any of the art. So they can not adapt their style, because I usually pick the artist based on how they draw, but they can make sure to try channel what I had in mind with more than just the words on the script, because sometimes the script doesn't always tell the story the way it's supposed to be. And like Plexus was indicative of that, because I was working with 3 different artists, Rebecca, Colin, and Steve, and I'd never worked with any of them before, so it was first time working with each of them. So each story was kind of a learning experience for me to try to figure out how to work with a new creator. Because when you're writing comics, if you're working small press, unless you have one artist who can dedicate all of your time to your stories, you're working with a few different people, and it can be stressful in a way trying to find an artist who you think would be good for an idea, especially if they don't have the time, because then they'll have to say no, and it mightn't necessarily be because they don't like your comic. It can be because they don't have time to do it. And I'm saying comic because it can be a pitch or a script until the art is put on the page. It's not a comic. It's just the start of one. it's I wouldn't even say it's the foundation. It's more like the blueprint. And like writing scripts is very much just creating the blueprint for how the comic is going to work, and then the artist is the entire construction team telling you whether or not your blueprint is making any sense.
Yeah, about the story, like the 9 panel grid that you say, I think it works really, really well, because like it always feels a little more, I don't know if cinematographic, but a little more dynamic than other ways of putting a comic together. So it really feels like you feel the chaos more, because it's very built into these structures that you see, its movement. It's really cool. The ending was really cool. And also, like, going back to Turning Roads, and a few things you said now reminded me that maybe, do you think that the result is this Turning Roads anthology that we're eager to see? I'm super eager to see. Do you think it also adapted better traditional stories because because it is a collaborative work as traditional stories usually are, and that makes a parallel. Like traditional stories usually are a collaborative work of people telling them, and comics are a collaborative work by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that comics, like, I think aside from like 3 or 4 people, it's all teams. So I can remember 3 off the top of my head where they're individual creators on a story, but the rest are teams trying to figure out how to change how a story is told, or in some cases bringing a fairy from Irish folklore into the 21st century. So the guts of what the thing is hasn't changed, but the world around it has, which is an exciting idea. Dave Hendrick and Pete Murray are doing something like that, where they have it's just some fairies who've gotten lazy and accepted the convenience of the world, and they've slightly adapted with the times, but only to the point where they don't have to do anything anymore. They don't have to be the trickster fairies. They don't have to try help people to get what they want because everything's so convenient. And yeah, I think if it weren't for the collaborative nature of it, like, as I think Dave and Pete bounce a lot of ideas back and forth. Hugo Boylan and Hugh Madden are doing that as well with a take on the King of Cats, which is like one of the really folk tales in Ireland. It's the one least rooted in like fairies and the different cycles of storytelling. And Hugo messaged me at one point. He's like, "So we don't have a script. We kind of have a skeleton of a script, and we go back and forth on it. So it's like this chaotic form of storytelling. I wouldn't
Wow.
expect it from anyone other than those two. They're Hugo has this great mind for ideas, and he's studied classical studies, and the only reason he hasn't released more comics lately is because he's waiting on responses from pitches that he has out with publishers. So he's funneled any money he has for comics into these pitch documents to try get them published professionally and distributed and into comic shops. So I was delighted when he was like, "Hey, I want to do a comic." I was like, "Yes, I'm taking you out of retirement so people can read more Hugo comics." And Hugh Madden normally works by himself. So he's normally just a cartoonist. I say just a cartoonist, but he doesn't do the collaborative sort of comics a lot of the time. And he just come off the back of doing a 200 odd page adaptation of Treasure Island, which was insane. He did a page a day for 2020, and
Wow.
he was looking to do something else. And he was like, "I think I want to work with somebody else for a project, just get it out of the way." And I was like, Hugo needs an artist. So I paired them up after the story had been pitched, and they've just been building this chaotic little King of Cats story. I've seen one page of it, and I'm just like, "Okay, give me the rest, because I need to see how this goes." Because they bounce off each other really well, even though they've never worked together. And I think that's the sort of way that a lot of comics in this book are going to be told, where the creators are going back and forth on their idea, and it changes it from just a bare bones, here's what the myth looks like, and there's 3 or 4 different sources telling you this is what the myth looks like, and then they just turn it upside down, and they'll throw in a sci-fi element, or they put it very into the 21st century and just have things go wrong, because that's what Irish folklore is all about. Things go wrong all the time. we don't do happy endings in Irish folklore.
I mean, from what I can tell, we also have fairy stories, fairy tales here too, and a chaotic retelling sounds pretty good. Sounds like it would fit the purpose.
We don't like things wrapping up neatly, and if people are ending the story happy, The story's not
Mm.
over.
I mean that could also be like for historical perspective. Like if you have a struggle to tell, you probably don't tell it like neat and clean. You tell something that reflects life.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And okay, so I think this is my last question, and is what do you plan for the future? And also, what two questions? What do you plan for the future? What do you have for the future? And also, when are we seeing this happen? This release, because I pretty much want to see it happen. I want to read everything and have thoughts about everything.
So the second question is the easy one to answer. So
Hmm.
the plan for fulfillment of the Kickstarter is August. So the artists have until June to get in the artwork. I built in delay time because our printer is based in the UK, and
Hmm.
Brexit has destroyed everything. But I
Hmm.
decided to go with Comic Printing UK. It's a guy called Rich, and he's a big part of the comic community in the UK, and a lot of Irish people know him as well. So I could have gone for him or a commercial printer, and I was like, you know what? At this point, I think we passed the 8K goal, so it was Declan's cover, and I was like, I want someone who cares about comics to be handling this book because he's part of the community, even if he doesn't like do line art or write scripts. He still makes comics as his job. He's his entire job is printing comics, and I built in the delay time for him as well because he sends over a proof copy and things like that, so I can make sure the book is the way I want it to look. So July we should be packing everything up. At this point, it's like over 200 paperbacks I'll have to pack up to send out to people. So that's going to occupy some time. I think I'm going to bribe someone with food and drink to help out. And in August, people should have it in their hands to get backed, and it'll be going up on Break Store then as well, in both the digital and physical format. And then after that, I take a break. And no, I'm kidding, because I think by August, so Limit Break has a tiny 3-story anthology being put together
Oh.
in our more traditional way of doing things, where we don't have an open pitch to it. It's literally, I grabbed a writer who I knew was trying to do some more work. I grabbed Gary, who I keep wanting to publish things with, and we're putting together a little 3-story anthology, same size as Plexus. So it's 3 roughly 8-page stories. I think you're the first person we've announced that to publicly.
Oh, that's great.
Because until a couple of weeks ago, Gary had forgotten about it because of COVID. I should also point out Gary is a recently qualified barrister, so he's been trying to build up his trade in the middle of a pandemic. He's managing it. He's doing well. The boy's smart, but yeah. So we hadn't really confirmed anything. We don't have a title for it yet. I don't know what Gary's story is about. I don't know what Seamus's story is about. This the other guy. He has a completely Irish name. And Seamus is also working on his own collection of short stories that he asked me, probably 2 years ago or more. I'd say 2 years ago. I'd say, or maybe it was shortly after Plexus was done, if he could publish it through Limit Break. Because Seamus can't attend conventions all the time, and he needs to be at home for his wife a lot more than he used to, which is like, I understand the circumstances of it. It was completely understandable. He asked us, like, absolutely. Like, I wanted more people to see Seamus's comics for ages. He had a lot of bad breaks with artists having to drop out of projects for various reasons. So while he had one comic out in 2015, he had 2 or 3 in production since that fell flat, even though he'd done all the work and he was ready to pay artists to do everything. And at this point, it's like, yes, I want more people to see your work, and I want to be the one to tell people about it. So those 2 things are happening. What else is happening? Gareth Luby's working on 2nd issue of Meouch at the moment. So that's our it's an action comedy about a cat that kills people. It's full of cat puns. It's one of the more enjoyable things to write. I get to mess around a bit, and then Gareth has this lovely cartoony style for the character. So we get to tell this fun little murder story. It's a 3-issue arc, so he's just going to do issues 2 and 3 back to back, and then we're going to have a Kickstarter for them in the trade. So we're just going to collect all 3 together into one book. Because at this point we just want it to be in people's hands, especially with the entire of 2020 disappearing from our schedule. We just want to be able to show off our murder cat a bit more. And I'm also working on the next issue of Plexus. So I have art back from 2 people so far. So Donna Black, who has done one of the prints for the Kickstarter. So she did the Balor of the Evil Eye one, which is the completely messed up one. She has a story for Plexus issue 2. And then another Irish artist, Barry O'Sullivan, who I've forgotten the name of his book, Fool's Campaign. He did his own book, Fool's Campaign, so he wrote it, drew it. I don't think he colored it for the first printing. He kind of had like a paper effect over it all, so it was like muted tones rather than full colors, and he let it all himself. So he was used to doing a lot of work by himself, but I managed to get him on a story for Plexus, which is it's full of action, but it's also about one guy just completely panicking to try to stop the world ending. I mean that literally. The guy's just, it's called Run, and the entire thing is this one guy running and jumping and trying not to fall into a void. It's a lot of fun. I picked the one of the few people who I knew was comfortable doing like lots and lots of action, who I hadn't gotten to work with yet. So I was like, I just kind of handed him the script and stood back, and then I had to kind of pull him back in a bit because he was taking his time, because he ended up back in work because the pesky pandemic would not just stay quiet.
Yeah.
But so I have two stories back. I have a third story with an artist. I don't know what point she's at with it, so I'm not going to tie her down to it in a video. I plan on emailing her asking, do you want to push this one to issue 3? And I can find another artist for a different story to fill the third slot. So rather than taking away the story, just, push it into a different issue. Because the second and third issues kind of have a similar... There's a slight crossover in how the stories are told. So the first one was completely all about how people connect in the middle of a sci-fi story. So Glitch was, it was a sci-fi story, but it was about a friendship and anxiety.
Yes.
Shelter was a sci-fi story, but in a bomb shelter, and it tells two side-by-side stories, one between a man and his child, not knowing what happened to his wife and his other child, and 2 quote-unquote radio presenters who are keeping the entire bomb shelter up to date on things, who are keeping secrets. So there's a lot of media conspiracy going on in that story, and it's only 8 pages. But it was also written at the time when lots of media stuff was coming out. So it was a case of, can you trust your journalists? Can you trust people giving you the story?
Yes.
And then Al, which is the last story in the book, is it is effectively about 2 mothers trying to save their child, but it's about an android, and it's cybernetics, and I wanted to keep the same sort of consistency in what, like, collecting all the stories in each issue under a theme. So issue 2 is dealing with different worlds, and issue 3 will be dealing with like kind of extra dimensional stuff, or maybe have them do the way around. Other way around. Extra dimensional is issue 2, other world is issue 3. So there's lots of really mad stuff going on in Donna's one. She works in mixed media, so her visuals come off really, really mental in like the best way. And I'd seen a few of her comics before. I was like, yes, I need to work with this woman before she gets too famous. And yeah, she told this lovely little story of a guy losing his mind. I do have a bit of a theme in my work, but
yeah, that was great to like hear all these descriptions, because I already saw like reading the book, but it's great for people like, should I pick this? The description you gave is like really great for people to like, yeah, pick this.
at conventions I would pitch the cyberpunk android story for Texas as cyberpunk 1950s lesbians trying to save their son. So, and people would just be like, "Okay, sold. I want to read that." just the strange combination of words does the job sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
I think those are.
the whole teleporter who has anxiety is really what was to me like, oh, I need to read this. So so yeah.
So the story I'm working on Rebecca is going to be in the anthology coming out later this year with Seamus and
Oh,
Gary, and it's set in the
oh,
same world with different characters, but they know who Shane Lewis is, so they make reference to Shane Lewis, so it ties it all together. So it has another superpower thing going on, but it's dealing with a whole different issue for different sort of characters. They're a bit younger. They're in high school this time, so it's kind of they're like 2 or 3 years younger than Shane, and they're coming towards the end of their time in high school. I don't want to give too many details away because the whole point of it is the twist. Um, but yeah, it's a fun little story, and I really want to just keep revisiting this world with Rebecca and telling these tales of people with powers. But that's not the point of the story. The powers are just part of who they are. I
wow,
don't think
that's
comics do enough.
amazing. So that was really great to hear, and for a reminder that well, in this video and in the description of everything will be the link to Turning Roads. Like, pick your copy because that this is gonna be big. I sure I already backed it. Like in the first day I saw it, I was like, yeah, I have to back this. So so yeah, now I'm even more like, yeah, I have to back another one to give to someone. Just in
Yeah,
case.
I honestly can't wait to just like hold the book in my hands because it's gonna be such a good feeling. I've never been more excited to hold a finished copy of something, and it's not the first book I've ever done, but
Yeah, but
it
like,
seems like it's the one that seems to be the biggest deal for me, and I guess it's my way of showing that like, hey, I understand comics a bit.
I mean, the both the idea, what you told me, and what the artists that are there, this is gonna be awesome. So yeah, so thank you so much for coming to chat with me and with Comic Watch on this. And well, that was great.
Thank you for having me.